Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Can We Live with AI, brought to you by the California Center for Ethics and Policy, or CCEP, the Digital Humanities Consortium, or DHC, as well as the Philosophy Department at Cal Poly Pomona. My name is Tiffany Ju. I'm a philosopher and a CCEP faculty fellow. Some of you know me from being in my class. Each year, CCEP organizes programming, including a student fellowship program, a spring seminar class, and our annual speaker and panel series around a central theme of national and global concern, but especially pertinent to California. So this year's theme, of course, is artificial intelligence. And this year, CPP also launched our Digital Humanities Consortium. The DHC treats technology as both a tool and a subject for humanistic inquiry. And it offers resources for students, faculty, staff, and the broader CPP and Pomona communities to learn more about the digital humanities through hosting experts, pedagogical workshops, micro-credentialing, and showcasing faculty and student-produced research. And before introducing our speaker today, I would like to encourage you all to sign up for our mailing list and check out our socials, which are not on here, but okay. And so today's event will also be recorded, just so you know, and shared on CCEP's podcast, which you can find on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere you get your podcasts. So Shannon Vallor is the Baillie Gifford Chair in the Ethics of Data and Artificial Intelligence at the Edinburgh Futures Institute at the University of Edinburgh, where she is also appointed in philosophy. She is the director of the Center for Technomoral Futures and the co-director of the Bridging Responsible AI Divides program. Her research explores how new technologies, especially AI, robotics, and data science, reshape human moral character, habits, and practices. Her work includes advising policymakers and industry on the ethical design and use of AI. She is a former visiting researcher and AI ethicist at Google. In addition to her many articles and published educational modules, she is also the author of the book Technology and the Virtues, A Philosophical Guide to a Future Worth Wanting, as well as The AI Mirror, Reclaiming Our Humanity in an Age of Machine Thinking. Please welcome Professor Vallor.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me all right? Excellent. Thank you to the Philosophy Department and the university for bringing me here. And it's been a lovely visit so far, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the day. So let's get into it. I'm going to talk for about 45, maybe 50 minutes, and then we can have a good conversation afterwards. So my new book, The AI Mirror, uses the mirror as a metaphor to help us better understand how today's powerful AI tools work, what they are and what they're not, what they can do for us and what they can't, and what they can do and probably shouldn't. So throughout the book, I talk about AI in the context of our humanity. And I mean by that those capabilities that we most treasure in the human animal and that are most essential to our shared flourishing together on this planet. In this lecture, I'm going to pose the question, can we live with AI? And that we is defined not just as you and me, but the human family as a whole. And that's important for reasons I'll explain. If you're in this room with me, you can probably live with AI. It might even save your life. The sensors in your brand new car's AI network might alert you to an imminent brake or steering failure that would previously have caused a fatal crash. Or medical diagnostic AI might help your radiologist spot a tumor early, or it might alert hospital staff that you're developing sepsis hours before nurses and doctors would have noticed. AI might design a new drug for an otherwise terminal illness that you develop a decade from now, and you might be lucky enough to afford it. But don't confuse that singular fortunate possibility with a good answer to this question. I likely can live with AI, and most of you can too, but there are many who will not be able to live with AI. For example, those in war zones like Gaza who are already being targeted for airstrikes by mindless algorithms with no understanding of the value of a human life, or those who are already being culled by authoritarian governments using AI to automate the identification of their political opponents, or those who will die of thirst because the water they need is diverted to cool the new data centers that AI companies are lobbying to expand all over the planet. But even then, I'm talking about people who are living today. The question becomes more urgent and infinitely more important when we extend its scope to future generations. And a lot of my talk will be concerned about how challenging it is to answer that question when we do. Consider, for example, the insatiable hunger of AI companies for new reservoirs of energy, rare earth minerals, and water to enable the growth of those data centers. Microsoft has made a deal to reopen the notorious 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor here in the States. And cities and nations around the world are now hedging on their climate targets because they would require a more modest pace of AI adoption. The city of Omaha, Nebraska, had pledged to stop burning coal for the sake of residents of North Omaha, a minority neighborhood suffering life-threatening respiratory disease from polluted air, a neighborhood that had seen those consequences of coal for decades and was about to finally introduce a change that would allow the children in that neighborhood to perhaps be free from those life-limiting consequences. But Omaha has reportedly now reneged on the pledge after striking deals with Google and Meta to open new data centers that the Omaha Power Utility estimates are responsible for 2/3 of its projected growth in energy needs. So, ask the residents of North Omaha if they can live with AI, if their children can live with AI. Well, let's listen to ex-Google CEO Eric Schmidt earlier this year, responding to a question about how to make AI models and data centers more energy efficient so that we might perhaps put less pressure on regions to expose their citizens to these kinds of harms.
All of that will be swamped by the enormous needs of this new technology. And because it's a universal technology, and because it's the arrival of an alien intelligence, right, something we don't understand, we may make mistakes with respect to how it's used, but I can assure you that we're not going to get there through conservation. That's the key point. And the economics will drive it anyway. My own opinion is that we're not going to hit the climate goals anyway because we're not organized to do it. And the way to do it is with the things that we're talking about now. And yes, the needs in this area will be a problem, but I'd rather bet on AI solving the problem than constraining it and having the problem, if you see my plan.
Okay, yeah, we see the plan. The plan, so it seems to me, is to tell future generations that we gambled on their survival and health so that corporations today could extract maximum profit from what Schmidt calls an infinite demand for power-hungry AI, rather than pursue conservation now to limit the damage to them later. But I wanted you to hear something else in Schmidt's words. He said that all of our valiant efforts to make AI more efficient, quote, will be swamped by the enormous needs of this new technology, end quote. What needs does AI have? Does it need to breathe clean air? Does it need clean water to drink, to stave off dysentery? Does AI need to live? You might be confused by his reference to the arrival of an alien intelligence. which makes you think of a film like Arrival, where the needs of the intelligent aliens rightly come to be seen as akin to ours. But nothing has arrived here. AI systems are built. And as I'll make clear in this talk, these tools that we've built out of data and math are no more alien than your own reflection in the mirror, and just as mindless. A mindless machine has no needs, yet Schmidt speaks of its needs as swamping yours and that of future generations. And I think that's telling. So can we live with AI or not? We also have to ask ourselves what we mean by the question itself. In my remarks, I've interpreted it as a matter of survival. Can we live our natural lives with AI in the picture? But the question is inherently ambiguous, at least in English. Can you live with it often means, is this minimally acceptable to you? Does it allow you to go on living in the way that you want to? Or does it do some kind of damage that will compromise your life, make your life somehow lesser? And I think understanding the question that way brings it home even to those of us living today, even those of us in this room. I can survive with AI, I'm pretty confident. But I'm not sure I can live with it, at least not if we carry on with it in the way that we are heading. Another way of asking the question depends on how we interpret the word can. And at this point in the talk, you're already probably regretting coming to yet another talk by a philosopher, since if you ask us one simple question, we will turn it into 12. But these distinctions matter. So the word can implies possibility, not probability. I can climb Mount Everest, but I probably won't. So we should want to be confident that we will live with AI, not just that it's possible. And more than this, we should be confident that we will live well with it, not just grimly carry on breathing in a world where our relationships with others, our knowledge, or our environment have been degraded by irresponsible uses of AI. In recent years, I've been thinking more and more about the promise of innovation and technology, which was, as a child, my primary fascination and the reason that I ended up studying technology. But I've been thinking of late how much of that promise has been stolen from us over the past few decades. And that's reflected also in public attitudes about innovation and technology, where you see a steep decline in people's excitement and enthusiasm and optimism about what technology will do for them. So I was curious about why that is. 3 years ago, I wrote this piece in MIT Technology Review that resonated with a lot of people. It was called, "We Used to Get Excited About Technology. What Happened?" And in it, I compared the current tech ecosystem with the history of 20th century innovation, which led us to expect to live in worlds where everything from the quality of education to the quality of the streets we walk on was measurably better. At the turn of the century, we had the internet at our fingers, high-speed rail, and a green energy transition on its way. We even healed the hole in the ozone layer. We still had a lot of problems, but the innovation ecosystem was, for the most part, aimed at tackling them. But today, in many of the countries where we consume the most new tech, we have crumbling schools and healthcare systems, an internet and media ecosystem that are increasingly poisoned by disinformation, dirtier rivers and beaches, anti-vaccine politics, more lonely, anxious young people, and climate targets that we're backing away faster from than an angry bear. In the US, supposedly the beating heart of the world's innovation ecosystem, we're about to kill off all of the 20th century regulations and economic incentives that created investment in technologies for food safety, environmental cleanup, and infectious disease prevention. So somehow we're moving backwards. But we have Instagram and TikTok and eyeglasses with smartphones in them and VR headsets and AI to befriend or date us, make our art and music for us, write our books for us. So going back to this article, which to me seems more urgent now than it was when I wrote it, is this what we asked for from tech? Is this what we wanted? Is this the innovation we needed? And if not, how did we allow ourselves to get here? So there's a whole talk to be written to answer that question, but we're not going to go there. But I want to leave that question hanging in the air. Instead, let's ask, where do we go from here? And what role do we want AI to play in that? Because AI is not going away, and I don't think it should. I still want that kind of AI that can tell me what part of my city will flood tomorrow, or what kind of medical treatment is the best match for my genetic profile, or how we might make our crops more resistant to heat and moisture in a world that's going to have far too much of both. What I don't want is the kind of AI that makes it harder for us to live or harder for us to live well. Because right now, that's what we're getting. And we shouldn't just live with it. So to help see why, I'm going to first introduce you to a few concepts from my new book. And I'm talking about mirrors first, because that will help us ground this talk in a real sense of what AI is today and what it isn't. And then I'm going to talk about AI's impact on 3 dimensions of living that are essential to our humanity: our space, our time, and our stories. Let's start with mirrors. Understanding AI and its implications for us is a daunting and ever-expanding task. How do you understand a new social force so vast and encompassing that it is all at the same time changing how we make food, music, love, laws, and wars? When we need to understand a new thing, we seek a metaphor, a way to link the thing that we don't understand with something that we do. No metaphor is ever perfect, but the mirror metaphor for AI is far more apt and illuminating, much safer and less deceptive than the familiar metaphor that we're all encouraged by the AI industry to use for understanding their tools. And of course, that's the metaphor of a mind. Now, you might wonder, how can a mirror possibly be a more fitting and useful metaphor than a mind for something that contains the word intelligence, which is a word we only associate with minds? So let me explain. First of all technologies are mirrors. Technology is an extension of human values and imagination into the built world. Every technology, from the wheel to the book to the engine to the computer, reflects what humans of certain times and places have thought was worth doing, worth trying, worth making, worth enabling. So technology is human all the way through. And so all technologies are mirrors of us. But today's tools are mirrors in a much more powerful sense. Before I explain how, it's important to point out that AI is not one technology, but many. Many of you have been conditioned by the AI industry and media to think that AI is generative AI. AI is ChatGPT. But AI is a broad and diverse range of technologies which have very different capabilities and also very different benefits and risks. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is about the particular risk and benefit profile of generative AI, because that's the form of AI that AI companies are pushing the hardest right now. But there's actually a lot of other types and applications of AI that might be much more suitable for use in many of the areas that we'd like to use it. AI is more than just technology, too. It's a field of scientific research. My own University of Edinburgh has been studying AI for 60 years now. But today, most people know AI is a suite of tools and techniques for solving human problems with computers. And the mirror metaphor is a stronger match for the kinds of AI that we're using today to do that, because the mirror metaphor is best suited to describe machine learning tools trained on large volumes of human-generated data. And that's the kind of AI that most of us are using today. So I'm talking about large language models and their cousins, the foundational technology behind consumer-facing generative AI applications like ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude. I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds about how large language models, or LLMs, are constructed, but a simplified understanding of how mirrors work can help anyone grasp the basics. So, when you see an image in a glass mirror, it's the result of 3 interacting components. The first is a polished and coated glass surface that has the required physical properties to receive and reflect light. The second is the light itself. And the third component is the reflected image that you see when you look at the glass. Now, when you talk to a large language model, a very similar set of components is interacting with you. First, corresponding to the polished glass surface, is the machine learning algorithm. That's a set of encoded software instructions for training something that we call a machine learning model. A machine learning model is a large, complex mathematical structure that has been extracted from an initial data set. The learning algorithm first structures and then further trains the model, meaning shifts it, adjusts it, by specifying how that model will change as it is exposed to data, much as the physics of a polished mirror determine how the glass will receive and reflect incoming light. Different kinds of glass surfaces will reflect light differently. Different kinds of learning algorithms will extract data differently. Now imagine if a mirror's glass surface could be physically altered in subtle ways by the light that fell on it, such that the more light fell on the mirror, the better polished the surface became, and the better the mirror performed. Now you have a basic intuitive grasp of how machine learning works, right? It's like we have this initial surface that's prepared, but it's designed in such a way that as more data falls on it, the surface becomes more and more fit to reflect the patterns in that data. Now, once the mirror is polished to its final state, we have what we call a trained model that can receive and successfully reflect the patterns in any new relevant data that are given to it. And that data, of course, represents the second component of the metaphor. Data is the light. Instead of visible light falling on physically polished glass surfaces, AI mirrors work when stored digital data falls on mathematically polished algorithmic surfaces. The model gets its initial properties, what we call weights or parameters, by means of exposure to this vast torrent of digital light. Our data, all the hoarded data that large AI companies have grabbed and scraped and in some cases stolen from us so that they can beam our collected light into their own tools, training them to reflect new light, new data inputs back to us in ways that look intelligent. And that's the third and final component of the mirror. The reflected images that they show back to us are the outputs that we get when we use the model. Whenever we enter the new light of our prompts and queries, the answers we get back from the model, those intelligent-seeming replies in text, audio, or video form, are just composite reflections of all the data taken from us that now resides in the model as a stored mathematical structure. So, if they are just mirrors made of math, why do the responses of a large language model sound so intelligent, even conscious or alive? It's because they're reflections of data taken from intelligent, conscious living beings, from us. But if you now understand that this is a mirror image of intelligence, you realize that what looks intelligent is not. Think about when you walk into your bathroom in the morning and you look in the mirror. If you're alone, you know very well that there's not a second face with you in that room. No second body, despite the fact that you can see one, right? If you're alone, there's only one face, one body in the room, and a mirror image of it. And you know the difference, right? You know that the image of the face that you're looking at has no depth, no warmth, no smell, no life. It's a reflection of a face, not a duplicate of one. Just as a reflection of a face is not a face, a reflection of a flower is not a flower. It needs no water. A reflection of a flame is not a flame. It does not burn. A reflection of a mind is not a mind, and it does not think. Reflections are their own kind of thing. Very useful things. And as psychologists have demonstrated, only an infant or a creature that can't pass the cognitive stage known as the mirror test will confuse the thing with its reflection. But AI companies and their leaders who speak so glibly of the arrival of alien intelligences very much want you to fail the mirror test when it comes to their products. They want you to believe that you're seeing a new kind of intellect organically emerging on the other side of that algorithmic mirror, something even smarter, more powerful, and more capable than you are. Something that can not only help you, but teach you, comfort you, even speak and write for you. And one day that can't come soon enough for those who control the image, replace you. That's the power of the conjurer's mirror illusion and the danger. Much like the Roman poet Ovid's tragic figure of Narcissus, the boy who lost his life to his captivation by his own reflection, we are today at risk of losing ourselves in our AI mirrors, slowly becoming convinced that the thing on the other side is just as real, just as much of a mind as we are, maybe one day even more so. In my book, I describe more fully the power of these algorithmic mirrors to not only usefully reflect and magnify valuable patterns in our data, a power that can be life-saving when used responsibly, but like all mirrors, to also distort, confound, and occlude our reality. For example, AI mirrors not only reproduce and magnify the patterns of injustice in our data, they routinely produce even more distorted versions of these, bouncing back to us funhouse mirror images of our histories of racial abuse and exclusion, or reflecting past worlds when there were no women CEOs, or worlds where there were no women artists, even showing us worlds that have never existed, worlds where all attractive people are light-skinned and strangely look like siblings, or worlds where white people never use social services and where productive people are only young men with too much hair product. Now, these unpredictable distortions can be even more absurd, like Google's fine-tuned AI that notoriously wildly overcompensated for its underlying biases by portraying Nazis as racially diverse. Or its equally notorious AI overview tool telling us that nutritionists want us to eat 1 rock a day, or that you should glue your cheese onto your pizza to secure it. Now, you might think that these examples, which are from over a year ago, are cheap shots. Surely the AI that we have today has moved beyond these early failures, right? Yeah, not so much. This is from this week. So people found the fun thing that if you ask Google AI Overview what a particular saying means, it will tell you what it means, even if that saying is absolute garbage nonsense you just cooked up. Like, you can't lick a badger twice, or the pillar makes the frog, or you can't tax a kangaroo. So people had a lot of fun the other day with seeing just how many completely manufactured bullshit explanations for these sayings Google AI Overview would generate, right? Now, why is it still doing this? We've had a long time to address the problem known as hallucination, which, by the way, I encourage you to call fabrication or confabulation. Hallucination is a psychological state. Things that aren't minds don't hallucinate, okay? That's not what it's doing. But what you've heard of as hallucinations, these kinds of departures from groundedness in truth and reality, I encourage you to recognize that these are not failures so much as limitations baked into the design of today's AI mirrors, okay? The reason they haven't fixed it is because this is how these things work in the first place. You can't fix the thing that makes the tool work. So I'll come back to that point, all right? But again, I've picked on Google a lot, and I should probably spread around the pain a little bit. So this is X's Grokbot making up a news story about the mayor of New York City sending the NYPD into the subway to shoot the earthquake from last year before it could strike again, right? And this was, of course, put into a news feed. Now, we should be grateful for these more ridiculous examples because they quickly puncture the illusion of a machine mind, and they show the utter absence of thinking and understanding behind these hollow reflections. And we need that perspective when the AI falsehoods sound dangerously real. Like the same Grok News bot falsely claiming last April that Iran had struck Israel with heavy missiles. That kind of false statement in the middle of an active war could have led to absolutely devastating outcomes. Or Microsoft's AI bot telling New York City businesses that they could do flagrantly illegal things, like discriminate against disabled people in housing or steal their workers' tips. But what I said a moment ago, I'm coming back to, you really need to understand that there is no more thinking going on behind the reflection when these AI mirror images get things right. And of course, these are cherry-picked examples of when they get it wrong, but they do get things right a lot, which is why we use them. And when they get things right, they are serving the primary purpose of a mirror, to reveal things to us that might be difficult or impossible for us to see otherwise. So while the reliability of generative AI outputs remains a major problem, the power of AI mirrors is well demonstrated, particularly by machine learning models that are trained on narrower but higher quality data sets. So remember what I said about not all AI being the same. So we can get amazing outputs from AI that isn't trained on the whole internet, which includes a whole lot of hot garbage, but that's trained on really well curated data that's specific to the problem that we're trying to solve. Those are the kinds of models that can reveal early signs of cancer or sepsis in our medical data, or evidence of insider trading in our email and banking industry history. Not that anyone's going to be looking for that. Like all AI mirrors, though, they are also powerful magnifiers of the patterns in our data, from subtle truths to the harmful stereotypes and unjust biases that they reproduce in nearly every context. Just like fabrication is an unsolved and ubiquitous problem that's not going away from generative AI, bias is also an unsolvable problem. You can look for it, you can do what you can to mitigate it, but you're never going to get rid of it, because you can't get rid of the bias in human history. You can't get rid of the bias in everything that humans have thought and said and done that is stored in that training data. And that's what we have these models learn from. Now, if they were just reflecting back to us those biases, that would perhaps be troubling enough, but they do magnify them, because these are pattern, these are basically big mathematical pattern sniffers and amplifiers. That's how they work. They're useful because they can find subtle patterns and make them obvious and bring them to the forefront. Again, the good goes with the bad. If that pattern is a pattern of racial exclusion, what that means is that's going to get amplified, and the model is going to be better at excluding minorities, let's say, from a hiring pool than even the biased human recruiters were, if we imagine that better is an appropriate word to use there. But mirrors do a lot more than reveal and magnify our reality, because they also distort it. And that makes them potential instruments of deception. There's a reason that we put warnings on glass mirrors that distort our vision of what is true, right? So that we can get the useful part of the mirror, which in this case comes from the distortion, right? While being given some kind of guardrail or protection from the harm. Well, AI mirror images are now being widely used to confound us, as mirrors have always been, by both entertainers and charlatans alike. The entertainer part is fun, and many of you have been entertained by AI, right? Raise your hand if you've seen something entertaining that AI has produced. Of course you have. I'm going to use an example that's close to my heart, and I hope it doesn't offend anyone given recent events, but it still warms my heart, and I like to think that he would have laughed at this. But Balenciaga Pope, right? And I was particularly charmed by Chrissy Teigen tweeting that when she saw this, she didn't have a second thought that it was real, and it made her realize, she says, no way am I surviving the future of technology. Like, I'm done. I'm just not cut out for this world, right? But we use AI as a way to combine things in sort of surprising and funny ways. And so it can be a very powerful tool for cultural generation. But whatever the entertainer can use, the charlatan can as well. And they do. They deceive us with fraudulent deepfake images. You might be exposed to audio and video that is designed to gin up your political rage over a completely fictitious campaign speech from your governor or your state senator. It might make you break up with your girlfriend because you've suddenly seen her in porn. But, of course, she wasn't in porn. It might get you to wire cash to the fake face of your pleading parent or child that you would swear is begging you for help in their own distinctive voice, moving their own injured body, and shedding their own desperate tears. There are several cases now of people being tricked, for example, to wire their company's funds to someone who they thought was their boss because it was someone who video called them that looked and spoke like their boss and asked them to wire money to an account. So they did it. Well, turns out you can't trust your eyes and ears anymore. And in my book, I ask us to consider the heavy social, psychological, and environmental cost to us of this new mirror world and how we might refuse the offer and rewrite its terms in our favor. But I want now to take a different turn in the talk. I want to focus on how these mirrors, which can be used as tools to enlarge our possibilities, enhance our freedom, and secure our futures, are instead increasingly being used to steal these from us, to snatch away from us the space and time that we use to think, the power that we hold to know and craft our own narrative, and the confidence that we need to choose and build more humane futures. We might be able to live without these things, but why would we want to? So let me start with space. And the images are going to slow down a little bit while I lay out some deeper ideas. So in my book, I talk about something called the space of reasons, especially the space of moral reasons. And it's another metaphor, sorry, but it's a good one. The philosopher Wilfrid Sellars spoke of the space of reasons as the field of shared human thinking, where we explore and exchange thoughts about what might justify our beliefs and claims. Knowledge is social. It's made up not of singular truths or data points, but of the web of justifying reasons that thinking weaves to hold these truths and our minds together in a shared grasp of reality. The spatial metaphor is important. It reflects the fact that thinking is action. Like physical limbs, thoughts need space to move in. When we think, and especially when we reason, we need an understanding of the possibilities that still lie open to us. We need to be able to see ahead of us the contours of known reality that both constrain and enable our ambitions. We need to explore what the space of the real world allows and what it forbids to us. And so to reason, we need to use thought as a way to stretch into that open space and imagine the different paths that we might travel through it. The space of reasons has to be held open in the mind for this to happen. That's why we speak in spatial terms of the virtues of an open mind and the vices of a closed mind. An open mind has room, space to think and reason with others, room to navigate objections and contradictions, space to chart the new routes of thinking that will justify unfamiliar or unpopular or contested ideas. But a closed mind is boxed in, immobilized, and helpless. And this is why, of course, philosophers following the model of Socrates are trained to ask many questions before they attempt to answer one, and to follow every answer with even more questions. The questions are what hold open the space around the answers and allow for even better ones to come along. Now, AI tools can absolutely be designed to help us hold open the space of reasons, but for the most part, they're not. They're designed to instantaneously and tirelessly fill our mental space with answers. The one intelligent thing you will not hear a large language model say, unless it's been specifically prompted to do so, is, I don't really know, or I'm not sure, or why don't you tell me? Instead, the version of AI mirrors now being aggressively pushed by platform AI companies into the hands of educators, novelists, journalists, artists, doctors, judges, policymakers, scientists, and business leaders everywhere is a mental space filling machine. You want to know what Moby Dick is really about, besides a whale? Are you curious about the strongest and weakest arguments against imposing term limits for judges? Do you want to know what you should do to repair a damaged friendship? Do you want a better ending to your novel? An AI mirror has the answers, or at least some kind of answers, and it'll deliver them to you in milliseconds with a tone of unflagging confidence, so that you need not walk one more step through the endless space of reasons. The pesky business of thinking can be done away with as soon as possible. Efficiency at last. Because of course, efficiency is the ultimate goal behind today's AI gold rush. We could try to use AI mirrors as aids to our own learning, thinking, and deciding together in the space of reasons, but we are told that would be less efficient. And it's not clear just how much help these tools can be anyway to our thinking, because unlike the high-dimensional mathematical vector space occupied by an AI model, the human space of reasons is not mathematically closed. It's open to the future and to the world and to experience. But unlike our minds, which can use that open space to invent new patterns of thought, AI mirrors point backward in time. They know only the patterns in the light of the data we've already created. They can only mirror and adapt the shapes of the thoughts we've already had. And this is not what it's like to be in the space of reasons, where our thoughts can move forward, not just trawl backward. Like the light cones that constrain the travel of information in physics, AI mirrors cannot see or think into the future. When I ask large language models about styles of art that have not yet been invented, they suggest extremely well-established artistic approaches, like biosculpture, or using technology to visualize emotional states. We've been doing that for decades. These systems are rear-view mirrors. A fun one is asking a GPT model or any other AI model, what kinds of stories have not yet been written? So this is what I got when I tested this. Now, I can tell you that all of these are stories that have been told. I mean, just look at the first one, parallel realities. How many movies have you seen with parallel realities in just the last, 12 months? So I actually, went through and kind of just looked to see where these all came from, because of course they came from somewhere, right? That's the only thing these models can do, is look backward and see what we've already done. Okay, you still, you might fine-tune a model not to answer your questions, but to ask you new ones, or to point out new paths through the problem space that others have seen, but that maybe you haven't. And some people do have the skills, the time, and the independent motivation to adapt AI tools for that purpose. So I'm not suggesting that AI has to be used to shut down thinking or to fill mental space. There are ways to use it, to hold that space open. But that requires an immense amount of skill and expertise on your part, both in holding open mental space and in using these tools to do it. So for most users, and especially for the companies and governments who are betting on these tools as magic productivity beans, the whole point, and the only thing that justifies the immense and growing cost of AI, is to save us the time and effort of thinking. And given the problems of fabrication that I mentioned, this is causing real damage to the information ecosystem. We've got science journals and courtrooms that are now plagued with research articles and legal filings containing AI-generated errors, faked images, and citations of studies and cases that don't exist. Again, if you think this problem is a couple years old, I saw that the filing yesterday in the My Pillow court case found that the lawyer for the My Pillow guy had used fake AI-generated citations in his filing. The judge was not pleased. And so this kind of problem has not gone away, and this has caused, some of the investors to get a little bit spooked about, are we actually going to see the golden goose lay profitable eggs? But most investors are doubled down, right? They're convinced that the next generation of AI mirrors will work out the kinks, and that eventually we'll get tools that are good enough that businesses, lawyers, doctors, judges will be able to rely on them. And I want to tell you that we shouldn't take comfort in that prospect, even if you believe it's true. I'm going to say something you might think is odd, which is I think that's the worst case scenario, that these tools get better, right? Alfred North Whitehead said in 1911 that civilization advances in proportion to the number of important mental operations that we can perform without thinking of them. He was speaking of mathematical techniques to solve complex problems with less effort, right? In a way that would free us up for further acts of thinking. But now we have machine mirrors that will mimic the most plausible outcome of any thought process at all. Mimicry that's being aggressively marketed as a new way of life. One where, as a viral ad from Cluely AI says, you never need to think alone again. After all, they say, and this is a direct quote, as you can see, why memorize facts, write code, or research anything when a model can do it in seconds? As I say, so start cheating, because when everyone does, no one is. That's the world they want, where everyone has stopped thinking. So I think it's time to ask Whitehead's ghost and ourselves, what thoughts do the civilized keep? In a 2021 magazine essay of that title, I compared the seemingly astonishing ability of AI mirrors to generate plausible sounding answers to any complex problem, to a robot being flung to the summit of a towering mountain by an immensely powerful catapult. It's amazing, right, when the robot lands on the peak, but it's not mountain climbing. And when the robot or the AI mirror misses the right answer, it often misses not by feet, but by a mile. But that's not the point. The point is, God help the person who hires the robot as a mountain climbing guide or instructor. Because if you ask an AI mirror to describe the reasoning that it used to get an answer to a difficult problem, let's call that the cognitive mountain, you'll get a completely fictional, made-up route. And that's because that mathematical vector space of an AI model doesn't actually look much of anything like the mental space of reasons. And AI researchers have found this, right? That they are not comparable in structure. And the way that AI systems get their answers is not the way we get our answers. So when you ask an AI model to give its reasons, so think about some of the reasoning models that some of you might have played with. Researchers from Apple and Anthropic in separate studies have found that an AI reasoning model does the same thing that it did to get the original answer. It fabricates, it makes up the best sounding, most plausible guess at a valid chain of reasoning, which in many cases they can prove is a false picture of its own path to the solution. So its reasons are not the reasons it tells you in the chain of thought. And that's because AI doesn't reason. It guesses at a statistically plausible reasons-like shape for any question. Now the point is that mountain climbing, like thinking, is a skilled activity and an open-ended process. It's not a punctuated event. And that's why a person who rides the back of a robot to the top of the mountain, whether that's a physical one or a cognitive one, acquires no skill and gets no better at climbing mountains. Just like mountain climbing, thinking requires repeated practice of scaling difficult, daunting peaks. Thinking skills are gradually cultivated and mastered in the shared space of reasons, and it's these skills that we need as thinkers to get up the next mountain. That is, any new cognitive challenge we haven't seen before, especially ones our AI mirrors haven't seen before. Instead of using AI to do our thinking for us, we could design it to strengthen our own cognitive muscles and those of the next generation. But will we? It's not looking that way, because that doesn't make anyone a quick buck. Definitely doesn't make Cluely AI a quick buck. That would be a long-term investment in human cognitive advancement. And that's not what the AI market wants. The market wants to extract maximum returns from AI now, and that means shrinking the space for your thinking as much as possible. And there's a bonus for them, because not only does that cut out time, allowing us to solve some problems in seconds rather than the hours, days, or weeks a human might take to solve the problem, it cuts out the middle person, cuts out you. And you're not only slow, you're unpredictable, and so are your colleagues. You might question the task. AI is not going to do that. You might get together in the space of reasons and decide that the original problem is misframed or not a problem to be solved at all. Again, that's one thing you'll never see an AI model do. Just say, that's not a problem, or you've misframed the problem. You might decide that the most efficient and profitable short-term solution to the problem is unethical or unsustainable. You might turn left in the space of reasons when the market wants you to walk a straight line. And what better solution to that eternal problem of business and politics than offloading the task to a machine that doesn't need to walk with us in the space of reasons at all? Okay. I've been talking about space, and I'm going to talk about time, although I'm going to speed up this part because I am a little bit over time, ironically. I'll try to get to talking about stories, but these are all connected, right? Space, time, stories. From the standpoint of the universe, there's just space-time, and stories are how conscious beings make sense of our time and our space, how we give them meaning, how we come to understand what might come from each. Paul Ricoeur said that narrative storytelling is not only the activity through which stable, reflectively aware selves come into being, it's how we grasp the full arc of our lives and our communities. Without the ability to tell stories, there's no history, there's just disconnected events. No whole lives lived well or poorly, just fleeting moments. So time is really important because we can't tell stories without an understanding of time. And AI mirrors have this peculiar relationship with time that I've already mentioned, right? Like the massive optical mirrors in orbit that produced this image from NASA by collecting light that traveled from the early universe, AI mirrors are confined to the light cone of the past. Now, this is why Abebe Bahana has said that they're inherently conservative. She didn't just mean like politically conservative, she meant they just literally conserve the past and bring it forward. So just as our AI mirrors don't know the space of reasons our lives walk in, they don't know its time either. They don't have what philosophers like Edmund Husserl called our temporal horizon, the human experience of an open and indeterminate world held open by the flow of conscious time, where something new is always just over the horizon and about to come into view. What comes into view is often predictable, familiar, recognizable. And again, that's why AI mirrors can still get so much right. The sun rises every single day, just as it has in all of human history. The taxes are always due, and my cat always wants breakfast way too early. But things and events of startling new shapes do arrive from time to time on an utterly unpredictable schedule. As the philosopher David Hume pointed out centuries ago, the unremovable wart on human reasoning is that we've got absolutely zero evidence that the future won't suddenly go all pear-shaped on us at any moment. Life is utterly predictable until it isn't. But that's a wart I'm really grateful for. Our ability to experience the future as open is an essential part of what makes us human, because the future, being a giant question mark, is the engine of our cognitive, moral, artistic, and political freedom. It's what gives us the existential task of deciding each and every day, each and every moment, just how much of our past we want to bring forward with us into the future, how much of it we want to leave behind, and what we want to create in the open space that is new. AI mirrors don't give us that freedom. They require everything in the future to be filled from the past. And that violates what the Spanish philosopher Jose Ortega y Gasset called the essential, vital human task of auto-fabrication, literally self-making. He said, because the future is open in this way, to be human is to be called to be an engineer of yourself, an engineer of your life, by choosing from your future's open possibilities which ones to make real. But also with others, you're called to be an engineer of the future forms of life that we'll all share together. So we are engineers of human life, even if we are philosophers, even if we are writers, even if we are doctors and lawyers, we are still engineers. But to have that power, we need to have space and time. Even if we try to keep the future looking as much like the past as possible, that's an engineering choice to carry the past forward. And we know we can always choose otherwise. We can choose different artistic styles. We can choose different politics. We can keep burning the world for the temporary benefit of a handful of billionaires, or we can say no more. But AI mirrors can't make these kinds of radically new choices. They are stuck pointing backward and reflecting what has already been. It's why the speeches and essays and songs they generate are so weirdly generic and somehow familiar. And that's a real problem now that everyone from government leaders to screenwriters, from educators to criminal court judges and journalists are being told by AI companies that they need to use AI to write the future, to predict from the past data cone what decision or word or idea is most likely to come next, and then automate that statistical ghost of history into our lived reality. We live at a time where the most dominant economic, political, and environmental patterns of human activity on the planet are all under growing strain because these patterns are jointly unsustainable. So now, more than at any other point in human history, we have to exercise that collective power of auto-fabrication, the power that only we have to engineer another future, to turn the wheel in a new direction, to give ourselves more road to travel before we reach a cliff. AI mirrors, when used to optimize the efficient reproduction of human work, won't invent that future. They'll steal it from us, or rather, they'll be the thieves' tools. What we need in order to reclaim the future for humanity is new tools and new systems of value that build them. Tools designed to hold open and enlarge human space and human time. Time to write news story arcs for our lives. Time to give to our descendants to do the same. Yet to do that, we need to change the relationship between technology, life, and time. Today, we use algorithmic technologies from smartphones to social media platforms to video games to AI mirrors to generate content to fill all open time and all open mental space. This qualitative shift in the media age has been widely lamented in countless diagnoses of the ills of the attention economy, where the demands of platform business models and digital media politics mean that your eyeballs and your children's eyeballs are the most prized object of economic and political control. And sure, those of us who were captured by the attention economy walked into the trap, but we had a good push. And once the doors closed behind us and all our friends and colleagues were in there with us, it got harder to see a way out that wasn't exile. And because of this, we increasingly do not know what it is to have unfilled time or unfilled mental space. And a growing number of us do not know what to do with it on those rare occasions when open time and space does arrive, other than to fill it as quickly as possible with more algorithmic content. And AI mirrors are the latest delivery system, not just for finding that content, but for producing it. And that's the moment when the digital revolution challenges our most vital human capacity. That's the capacity and the will to tell and write our own stories. So this is where I'm going to end, talking about stories. So even those of us who aren't storytellers by profession are being marketed AI tools that will record the story of our work weeks or the story of our family vacations, summarize its highlights, prepare a diary record of it for safekeeping, remind us of any follow-up actions, suggest a plan for executing those actions, and then in the near future, take care of those actions for us. AI mirrors are being pushed on educators at schools and universities around the world, where we're told they can help us more efficiently develop our lesson plans and structure our lectures, summarize for our quick review the key points of the readings we've assigned to our students, and even generate the feedback for students on the bland insights about those readings that they are increasingly using their AI mirrors to write for them. Lots of educators are vigorously resisting this campaign, but the platform and edtech companies are relentlessly pushing AI into every tool we use. And if this trend continues, the result will be a classroom environment where the stories of our history, our literature, of politics, of scientific discovery, are increasingly being told, read, interpreted, and critiqued by our machines. Some of you, like me, are old enough to remember this image from the 1985 movie Real Genius, where the professor, fully disenchanted with students tape recording his lectures and skipping class, plays his lectures from the podium by boombox and skips the whole farce himself. Today, that farce is becoming reality, only instead of farce, we call it innovation. We can demand better. But first, we have to want better, and we have to believe we deserve it. And at this moment, that's a real challenge. There's a real fear that we have of the empty mental space where time opens, values are chosen, and our stories are written by us. When the story could be anything, yet the story as nothing feels unbearable, I'm pushed to choose something. And as scary as that is, and as increasingly scary as it is for younger generations who've been habituated by digital tools to avoid that kind of openness. That moment is when we realize that we've made the thing we've chosen matter. And choosing the future and making it our own, bringing it into our story by choice, is how we gain power over the future. It's how we realize that we're not helpless victims of fate. When we gain the courage and the confidence to reach across the void of mental space into time's open and formless horizon and bring something over from that undefined future into our present, to give it a place in our story. When we do that, we have power. It's what we do when we come together to invent new politics. It's what we do when we press new moral claims on the world. But to learn that power, we need space and time to think and feel without someone or something else filling it for us. Empty space and mental quiet is the field where new life grows. It's the field of the future. But it's the opposite of what digital culture gives. Modern digital life is much like a 90s Tetris game. Every moment is a challenge to fill the open space of existing as efficiently and seamlessly as possible. The blocks are falling faster and faster, and they must be quickly slotted into their predictable and rational places. See what's coming next. What meeting in your calendar? What exam? What deadline? What tweet? What photo? What reel? What's falling? React, process, like or save, fit it into the most likely slot, or let AI do it for you, but most importantly, leave no space in your mind, no space in your life unfilled. My book is a call to do the exact opposite of that, to fight to hold open the space of our lives and our time so that we can write the next chapter of the human story and let it go somewhere new. Unlike an AI model, we each and together sit on the edge of a future that is open, one pregnant with possible lives that need not reflect the past, not unless we surrender to machines the power of telling our own stories. We can live with AI if we choose to, but we cannot live through it. Thank you.
So my question is about the bit where you said something about AI giving us answers with unflinching confidence.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much of what's troubling about generative AI is that bit,
Yeah.
right? So I wonder if it could be modified so that it's telling us exactly what it is doing without hiding kind of what actually is going on.
Yeah.
So of course that wouldn't be as profitable, right? So maybe that's just naive and, you know, they're not gonna make money from us
Right.
if we're not confused. But I wonder if it's the AI itself or if it's the, like, you know, the way it's being sold to us.
I think it's both. It's a great question. So there have been efforts to develop, and particularly with earlier machine learning tools prior to generative AI, there is actually a commercial motivation to have a model understand the limitations of its predictions. Because, for example, in the medical domain, it makes a big difference if the model is really, really sure you have cancer, or it just thinks maybe you do, right? So it's a fairly old technique to try to generate confidence levels in a machine learning prediction. But there's a couple of problems. One is the bigger the model gets and the more complex the model gets, the harder it is to interpret the model and to know whether its reporting of its confidence levels is in fact valid. Just in the same way I said that reasoning models, which seemed, you know, and were marketed as the solution to fabrication, oh, you don't understand how the model got the answer? Ask it, it'll tell you how it got the answer. But it might be full of shit then, right? And yet it'll sound really good because that's what it does, is make up really good sounding answers. And so when we ask a model, are you sure? How sure are you? it's not hard to get a model to give an answer that ranges from I'm really confident to this might be the case, but you should definitely check your research. And actually, many of the commercial tools now, particularly in certain contexts, will temper their outputs that way. And they'll give you a lot of cautions. That's usually done at the level of fine-tuning. That is, the base model is still a confidence machine that will just generate an answer for anything. But there has been a lot of fine-tuning done to get the model to behave more the way we want it to. And one of the ways that commercial companies have fine-tuned the models, and fine-tuning is a way of kind of adjusting the likelihood of certain outputs after it has already generated the basic answer. So it doesn't change the kind of base model. It's just like almost like a filter on the top of the answer that steers the answer in certain directions. So you can fine-tune a model to be less confident. But again, the model is still a fabrication machine. So you don't know even when to trust its statements of uncertainty or its statements of great confidence. So it's really faking humility rather than actually knowing its own limitations. So the real advance would be models that could actually accurately represent their own limits. The reason that's so hard is because these models aren't connected to the world at all. And they don't know which parts of the world they know better than others. And any data point is for the model as good as any other. It doesn't have any grasp of which sorts of things it's in a lower position to understand. Again, you can get that with fine-tuning, so it might seem to know that. So if you talk to a model, you might ask it a question like, what's a good example here that I've seen? You might ask it a question like, can you advise me on my diet and what sorts of things I should be eating for maximal health? And it'll give you an answer, but then it might say, but of course, you should consult with a doctor. Individual bodies vary, and basically it'll say, don't just take what I'm saying for granted. But again, that's a result of fine-tuning. It's not the model's actual representation of its own ignorance. So the disparities between how human brains work and human brains work and AI models work is also rooted in evolutionary realities of intelligence. For a human, evolution has made it really important to know what you don't know. You die very quickly if you don't know your own limits. So our brains have been built to be very good at assessing our own limits. These models are not under those kinds of evolutionary pressures. They're engineered to be optimizers, to get to the answer by the most mathematically efficient route. And that goal is somewhat orthogonal to the goal of staying alive, which is what biological intelligence is for. So that's the other reason, is that they're not adapted to the same goals, intelligence and AI.
I was just thinking about this in terms of medical research and then other avenues like that. Is there any discussion about the legal responsibility of, let's say, AI being incorrect in a diagnosis, and then the medical team, the treatment, everything is hinging on that diagnosis, or even with the error on X with the, is there any discussion about the legal responsibility?
There's tons of discussion and no action forthcoming.
What do you think? See, if we're using AI, the more we're tasking it to do the thinking for us, then it's softening those thinking skills.
Yep.
So by relying on AI, I'm just thinking about, ultimately, it seems like it would be the medical profession's responsibility to check the AI. But if you're relying on AI, your capacity to diagnose is softening.
Yep. And also, to check every output is to defeat the purpose of automation. So it brings the time and the cost back into the equation, right? So you're asking a very sensible question, but you're asking it in an environment that, particularly in the last 6 months, at least in the English-speaking world, has completely abandoned even the pretense of imposing accountability or duties of care on AI companies. So the US and the UK have very clearly signaled that they will not be imposing these kinds of duties on AI companies by and large. So that responsibility is getting offloaded to the organizations that purchase and deploy these systems and the practitioners that rely on them. But as you say, that's a trap, because the whole utility of the system depends upon the practitioner delegating responsibility to the machine. If they maintain their own responsibility, then they have to do the same amount of work that they were doing before in many cases, right? Likewise, a lot of the companies adopting these tools simply do not have the in-house expertise to understand and evaluate the limits of these tools and understand what sorts of guardrails should be built around them. So for example, government agencies in the UK are being heavily pushed by the Labour government to adopt AI in the delivery of public services. But the reason they're doing that is because these government agencies are underfunded and understaffed and overworked. So they do not have extra resource to figure out how to evaluate the performance of these AI models in the situation, to build guardrails around it, and yet they're being pushed to rush to adoption. So the government agencies simply have to trust the AI vendors, the people selling the tools. But the AI vendors are not incentivized to be honest about the limitations of the technology. Their whole incentive is to sell it. And you sell it by talking about all the good things it does and being very quiet about the things it might not do well. And the only way you change that is with liability regimes. And this is what we've done in the history of innovation in the 20th century, which we've developed a collective amnesia about. I can't tell you how many times I go into rooms where very well-educated people tell me that regulation is an enemy of innovation, that it blocks innovation. The entire 20th century shows you that that is false, right? That the whole reason that the airline industry exploded and the skies are filled with planes is because we developed a regulatory system that made them safe and efficient. And that those safety statistics would not have come up without that kind of regulatory goal. So what we need to do is penalize actors who are selling AI tools without the appropriate guardrails and without appropriate transparency about limitations, and reward the companies that are developing and selling AI in responsible ways. Just like if you are an airline and you purchase an airplane from a company that falsifies its documentation about how that airplane performs, it's the airplane manufacturer that's legally on the hook, not you, when the plane falls out of the sky, if you can show that you operated it properly on the basis of the information that the manufacturer gave you. But if the manufacturer is under no legal obligation, then the planes are going to fall out of the sky. And that's the situation we're in with AI right now. So what's going to happen is a lot more people are going to get hurt before governments start distancing themselves from the tech company lobbyists that currently have a pretty strong stranglehold on their policy.
We would greatly appreciate it if you could fill out this quick survey for a chance to win free CCEP swag, notebooks, tumblers, fancy tote bags. And if you enjoyed today's session, if you could let us know, then that will enable us to have more in the future. I think we have a question from Zoomsville.
Thank you so much. We have a question from the Zoom that says, as an ethicist for a prominent tech company, did you feel like they took ethical concerns seriously? How do they put the profit-seeking aside?
Yeah, good question. So when I was at Google in 2018, just for some context, they had just recently released their AI principles, which were an explicit commitment to certain red lines that they would not cross, including the use of AI for weapons and surveillance, and certain things that were not red lines, but were things that they were committing to being careful about things like fairness and accountability. Okay. But to their credit, the organization recognized that without putting those principles into practice, they would be transparently just a kind of marketing exercise. So I was brought in, along with others on my team and other teams at Google, because there were parallel teams doing this in different ways at the time, 3 or 4 different teams. But all of us were brought in to kind of implement those principles. And the people I worked with were the most committed, sincere people I've ever worked with in my career. I still miss those folks a lot. And those, in many cases, were long-term Google employees. And what you have to understand, and this is definitely true of Google, but it's true of other parts of the tech world as well. Most people go into tech to make the world better. Most people go into tech at least not wanting to make it worse. No one wants to get up in the morning and be like, I'm going to go make the world suck just a little bit more today. That's what I do. So almost everyone I worked with at Google really wanted to build technology that was good for people and good for society. And for a long time, the company at a leadership level was signaling that it also would invest in these kinds of processes. But that was in large part a response to worker demand. So this was in an era where if you worked in Silicon Valley and you had technical skills and you could code, you had your pick of jobs. If you didn't want to stay at Google, there were 3 other companies who would give you a 20%, 25% boost on your salary and a huge stock bonus to move over. That gave employees a ton of power. And from 2015 to 2020 in Silicon Valley, a lot of tech companies were responsive to employee demands that they implement processes of ethics and governance and kind of responsible AI for the reasons that I've mentioned. So Google's leadership was responding to pressure from the rank and file that demanded these kinds of efforts. But what did you see happen in 2021 when the generative AI race took off, and also when the employment situation in Silicon Valley changed such that a lot of engineers were finding themselves unemployed and not quickly able to return to work at equivalent or greater pay? So now the power is in the hands of the companies who have more talent to choose from than they need. Predictably, all the AI companies walked away from those commitments and have walked away from those commitments progressively over the past 4 years. So just as of February, Google, for example, and most of you probably know about Google letting Timnit Gebru and Meg Mitchell go in 2021. And what that signaled, but it has been a progressive walking away from those commitments, including most recently Google saying it will no longer restrict itself to AI applications that don't involve weapons and surveillance. And Google's certainly not alone in this. So notoriously, when Elon bought Twitter, he fired their entire fantastic team led by Raman Chowdhury that was working on fairness and accountability and transparency and trust and safety at Twitter. Microsoft AI, Meta, all of them disbanded responsible AI teams over the past 4 years. So that's where we are today. And what that signals, of course, is that large organizations do what their economic incentives suggest. And so if you want them to behave differently, you have to change the economic incentives that they're operating under. And you do that through regulation and governance that's effective. And that's the gap that we're currently facing. So we'll see what happens. But there's a cost to this. So there's a huge downturn in public affection for AI right now. There's a huge backlash building. And lots of people are painting all AI with the same brush and saying, AI is just a bullshit machine. AI is just all about theft from our from our data and our lives and our creation. AI is only here to replace us. It's not here to help us. Certainly, there's lots of people who are still excited and enthusiastic about AI, but the number of people who are developing not just a cautious skepticism about AI, but deep resentment, hatred, and distrust, that number is growing rapidly. And that's a consequence of what these companies have chosen as a path. So I don't think it's even sustainable for AI that we continue in a world where there's no commitment to developing and deploying this technology in a trustworthy and responsible way. But how long it's going to take the AI companies to come back to commitments to responsibility is largely a factor of whether consumers use their power, whether voters use their power to demand better leadership on these issues.
We have another question from the Zoom saying that they really liked the metaphor of a mirror for AI. And their question is, isn't the ethical problem we're facing right now with AI something we've always faced with new technology, of the old human ethical problem of selfishness and greed and short-term survival, with the example of like when the automobile was first introduced and it was only beneficial for a few and a hazard for most, but now it's obviously everywhere?
So my answer to that is yes and no. Yes, AI is nothing radically new, and the forces that we're talking about, the forces of economic competition, the phenomenon of regulatory capture, the diffusion of technology that produces unpredictable harms as well as unpredictable benefits. We've seen all of that before. But AI is not simply something we've seen before because of a few factors. One is the scale and general impact of AI. So think about cars. Cars affected our lives as much as almost any other 20th century technology, but it affected transportation and everything connected to transportation. AI affects cars and transportation and medicine and education and government and scientific research and the law, and manufacturing. I mean, I could just go on. There's literally no part of human civilization that AI is not changing rapidly at this point. So the scale of AI's impact and the range is far greater than any technology we've seen, even more so than the computer. And it's happening in an environment where AI can disempower the very forms of human agency that have historically organized to keep technologies and their risks in check, to steer technologies towards more beneficial and safe applications, and to push for appropriate governance of those things. So again, going back to the 20th century, the 20th century was where we saw people push for more environmentally sustainable manufacturing and to push for sanctions on polluters. We saw in the biomedical area an expectation that biomedical advancements would be governed by strict inspections, by effective regulation, and by ethical commitments of those who adopt those technologies in medicine. And things like medical ethics had a huge impact on how biomedical technologies advanced in the 20th century. And yet they still advanced. So the point I'm trying to make is that when you make a new powerful technology, in such a way that it endangers people, the most important thing you need to do is build the systems of protection of human welfare so that people will continue to trust and adopt that technology. When you don't do that, in a culture where people sense they have that power, you see things like what happened with GMOs in Europe. GMOs are actually an incredibly useful technology, but they were not hampered by regulation in Europe. They were hampered by public distrust of companies like Monsanto and the belief that GMOs would not be developed and deployed in a safe and just way. And so you got these kind of blanket restrictions precisely because people were not confident that that technology was trustworthy. And we lost some of the benefits as a result of that. Same thing happened with nuclear technology, right? Right now, as dangerous as nuclear plants are, they're also an important way of thinking about the alternatives to fossil fuel extraction in the short term. And they could be part of a sensible energy solution. But you have in a lot of communities an absolute refusal to entertain that possibility, right? So again, thinking about how we balance the possibilities of innovation with public trust and confidence is a really important equation. And it's still shocking to me, actually, the way that AI companies, although when I talk to leaders at AI companies, they acknowledge this. They feel that they're compelled by short-term competition and incentives to ignore that and basically say, yes, this might be bad for us in the long run, but my targets aren't long run. My targets are the next quarter, the shareholders' expectations for next quarter. That's what I'm acting for. So again, in a way, you can blame the companies if you want. But really, if you want different behavior, you should have different incentives for powerful actors.